Welcome to Bad Hair Day, but this week's Sunday evening, morning, afternoon rant, entitled, What have you been listening to while we've been on enforced stay at home? But before that, I think we should really mourn the passing of Daft Punk. And I don't know whether, I can't remember whether it was this week or the week before, that Daft Punk announced to the world that they were splitting up. After nearly 28 years as an electronic dance group. That's pretty spectacular if you think about it, 28 years in the electronic dance music arena. I mean, most groups in the electronic dance area, you know, lucky if they last a year, but they've lasted 28 years. They were formed in 1993. And even though they were formed in 1993, I really wasn't switched on to Daft Punk until after the album Discovery, which was 2001. I just need to keep checking my notes. And the reason why I sort of, like many people probably were, sort of switched off onto Daft Punk at that point was because that album contained One More Time, which is just an iconic tune. And the other tune on that album that really resonates with me was Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger. And it was that sort of very statement-like chorus, if you like, that they put in that with the electronic voice behind it, probably using some sort of vocoder, I suspect. But it was those two songs turned me on to Daft Punk. And I thought at the time that they kind of encapsulated a lot of what electronic dance music was really all about, and how electronic music instruments should be used to make music. The funniest thing about that point in history for me was that was about the time I met my ex-partner, and a lot of my music making kind of stopped and got packed up. So it was interesting. I got turned on to an electronic dance music act, and at the same time kind of stopped doing it. Now, again, the other side of Daft Punk is they've been quite diverse. They've done a number of film scores. And again, in terms of the film scoring, the one that really I sort of gravitate to is the score for Tron, which was the second Tron movie, which was Tron Legacy. And I thought that the ambient music that they pushed throughout that film was utterly brilliant. I loved it. And in actual fact, if I go and look at my Spotify account, which is what I listen to when I'm working here doing my sort of normal day job, if you like, the film track or the film score for Tron Legacy is one of the ones I play quite often. I find it very, very easy to just sit, work to, with the music just sort of encapsulating me. So, unfortunately, R.I.P. Daft Punk. I sometimes wonder why I write a script, because quite often I sort of just wander off it. I'm going to change the way some of the videos work, just to gauge if it's better or not. As you know, I'm trying to improve the quality of the videos that the channel puts up. I don't have a production team, it's just me that does this, so I'm learning all the time in terms of how to do video production. And changing to this camera has definitely been a step upwards in terms of video production. And there's a new gizmo that's come in, which has been made possible by the Patreons. So thank you, Patreons, because that's going to mean that I don't have to keep getting out of my seat every time I want to start and stop the video. Anyway, I decided I'm going to put the channel promotion somewhere within the video. So here we go. Normal parish notices must be observed. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel and you like the contents of the video that you've been seeing and you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe icon. If you're one of these people who needs to be told when videos are going to be hitting my channel, it's the bell icon for you as well. If you've got to this point and enjoying what you're watching, give it a thumbs up. It really helps the video and the channel in terms of how YouTube does its algorithm thingies. And finally, down there is the address of the TM community and the Instagram and Facebook feeds. If you want to support the channel for less than the price of a cup of coffee, which really is an utter bargain, pop over there and support the channel by joining the community and supporting the production of videos going forward. But now, back to this video. So this video was entitled, "What have you been listening to while we've been on lockdown?" I've been working from home for over a year now. And while I'm used to working from home, and I have been in prior jobs, you always had a couple of days a week in an office. You didn't work from home 100% of the time, which is kind of where we are now. But the company I worked for sent us home before the UK went into government lockdown, and we've pretty much remained in this situation since. But one of the things that I've really found, or the housemates and I have really found, is we've struggled to find stuff to watch or listen to in our downtime. You know, stuff that's informative and just not rubbish on YouTube. And quite a lot of us are sort of looking at the streaming platforms and sort of watching, you know, deciding what box sets. And one of the things I found about living with the housemates is that we actually do have very, very similar tastes in terms of stuff we would watch. Yes, they're female and they quite enjoy the romance type stuff, and I'm a bloke and I quite enjoy sort of people jumping around and shooting things. But we actually have a lot of very common tastes, and we found stuff that we all quite enjoy watching from the box set range. Anyway, this gets me on to something I've been listening to while I've been working. And this is a podcast by two Aussies. And the podcast is called The Keyboard Chronicles. And I don't know whether any of you have come across this, but I do actually recommend that you find this on your podcast provider and give it a go. Now, as the name suggests, The Keyboard Chronicles, the podcast is focused on keyboard players. And it's not necessarily focused on gear, it's actually focused on the players who are playing the gear. And basically every other week, or for those of you that need it the other way around, bi-weekly, these guys have been interviewing well-known keyboard players. Or keyboard players you might not know about but have heard quite a lot in the past. So for argument's sake, this week's interviewee, which will be available next weekend for me to listen to, is a guy called Steve Porcaro. Now, those who don't know who Steve Porcaro, shame on you, but he is a member of the legendary group Toto, who I utterly love. And I've seen them so many times now. Every time they come to the UK or Europe, I try to go and see Toto. Because, you know, I don't know what it is, but they just produce rock music that you can listen to. It's really good. Anyway, that's this week's. So I haven't heard that one yet, so I'm waiting for that one to come down. But in the past few months, they've had Dan Walker from Heart, Matt Johnson from Jamiroquai, Jeff Babco, who plays week in, week out on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. So, you know, there is a variety. And before Christmas, I was listening to a podcast where they had, I can't think what her name is now, but she basically played with the Thompson Twins back in the 80s. So it's quite a wide diversity of people they're interviewing. And, you know, it's listening to these professionals and how they go about their craft. Now, what I've been really enjoying about these podcasts is that the person who's being interviewed, and I think, you know, obviously I'm listening to a podcast, which is an audio feed, but I think they're doing some sort of live Zoom style call, because on a couple of occasions they've mentioned that they can see the person on the screen while they're doing the interview. But what I've really liked about the person being interviewed is that they've really opened up about their career. It's not false, it's not staged, it's them just having a chat. And that's kind of how the podcasts go. I mean, being two Aussies, I mean, they're so bloody laid back that you know. But you know, they sort of, you know, talk about their career. They talk about how they landed their key gig. How do they end up in Jamiroquai, or how do they end up, you know, being the sort of key band member of the Jimmy Kimmel Show? How did they get there? How did that happen? How do they gravitate to a specific keyboard? You know, or is there not a specific keyboard? And who have they enjoyed recording with? These sort of things are what are covered. What's really interesting as a side here is the number of people that have stated that the Kronos is their go-to keyboard. You know, they might have other keyboards, they might be out doing other things, but when it comes to the workhorse on stage, a number of them have turned around and said the Kronos is the one they go to. Very interesting that fact that it's the Korg Kronos. Anyway, as I said, the conversation is very relaxed. It's easy to listen to. The two hosts who do this podcast are a guy called David Holloway, who acts as the anchor, and he has a co-host, which is Paul Bindig. And again, it's a very relaxed style of interview. Remember, this is an Aussie podcast, okay? So they're two Aussies. Aussies are very laid back, and I know that because I've worked with quite a few of them. And they do actually, you know, in common phraseology with some of the interviewees, be prepared for phrases like "what the F," or "didn't really give a F," or some of that. So you might get a little bit of that. So if you're not, you know, it's not profanity for the sake of profanity. It's how these guys speak. Okay, so just get, you know, that's how the guests speak, and it comes across in the podcast. They don't edit it out. So if you're a bit sensitive, then maybe this is not for you. But what I like is they ask some great stock questions. So one of the stock questions is, if you were stuck on a desert island, what would be the 5 key discs that would interview you? And they had a guy on the other week, and I'm trying to think of what the guy's name is, who plays with Pendragon. And you know, he sort of said, well, I was sort of in the record shop, and you know, I pulled out this CD, and it was Genesis Seconds Out. And he said, I put this thing on and thought, what the hell a ball. But he said, that CD influenced my career, and that would have to be one of my 5 on Desert Island discs, if you like. And other people have sort of quoted some jazz records, and other people have, a lot of keyboard players quote the Beatles. Because obviously a lot of keyboard players write material as well, so the Beatles comes up a hell of a lot in that kind of influential section. And another one which really gets me, and I can relate to this, and I'll tell you the story in a sec, is about what is the best train wreck you've had. And that one I really can resonate with you, because this is the situation where this expert keyboard player that's being interviewed gets to recount in a touring situation where they've actually had a complete train wreck, where it just goes wrong. And these have been really great to listen to, and they range from things like, you know, we decided that we weren't going to take my rig with us, we were going to do this particular show, and I was going to hire a synth rather than take my own, and it just blew up. You know, another guy sort of turned around and said, well, you know, we got there and we couldn't get the synth working, so I mimed my part all the way through and just looked good. Another one sort of stated the fact that, you know, they had a situation where the keyboard decided it was going to play a semitone higher or lower than the rest of the band, and they couldn't work out why until about 4 songs in, when the tech realised what button had to be pressed. And it's things like that have been really great to hear, you know, how it doesn't always go right for the professionals, which sort of gives me some solace because I've had a number of train wrecks in my career, and I'm going to recount one now because this one always sticks in my mind, and it goes back to probably the early 90s. This actually happened, and been booked to play a venue, and the venue was supplying the PA for us, and the desk. So the PA, the desk, and the speakers. So that's what was being supplied by the venue, not by the band. And we were just expected to sort of turn up, plug in, and play. So we turned up, as you do. And then back in those days, we didn't have a van. We all used to sort of like cart our equipment around in our various cars. So there I would have the keyboards laying down in the car, and then I used to have a piece of wood over the top of them. The piece of wood over. I used to have the stand underneath, the piece of wood over the top of them, and the keyboard sitting on top. And we got to the venue, and we set up, and we ran all the cables, and obviously being a keyboard player, I'm one of the key people who's going to be coming out through the PA. All the mics, had to be running the same way, and basically we came to the point where the sound engineer, who was little more than a spotty irk, said, right, I'm going to switch everything on now, we'll do a sound check. And he switched everything on, and as he switched everything on, there was a loud pop, and nothing worked. And the sound engineer had not a clue what he was doing. He really didn't have a clue what was going on. He was literally, he knew how to sort of change volumes on the mixing desk, but other than that, not a Scooby-Doo about the electronics that sat underneath this stuff. So I ended up sort of trying to diagnose what was going on. I traced the fact that there was a signal coming off the desk, but there was the amplifier wasn't actually producing any signal, even though it seemed to be on and working. And basically what had happened was the amplifier had gone wrong. Back in the day we called it going DC, and effectively when an amplifier goes DC, what it means is instead of when a signal comes into an amplifier, obviously it amplifies the signal, so you get the signal doing that. You get an AC, you get a plus or minus, which allows the cone in the speaker to resonate backwards and forwards, which produces the sound wave. When an amplifier goes DC, what actually happens there is the amplifier just basically shoots out a very high voltage, which shoots the cones out of the magnet and basically blows all the speakers, which is exactly what happened. And I suspect the reason why it happened like that was because the PA company had turned up and supplied us with 2 bass bins and 4 mid top cabinets, all running off the same amplifier, and I suspect the resistance, as in how many ohms this thing could take, was mismatched, and the amplifier just decided it wasn't going to work. And that was one of my most classic. I've got others, but I always remember that one because I always remember standing there with the owner of the venue shouting at us for breaking his PA, and we said, we didn't do anything, Gov. It's not our problem. Speak to the sound engineer. So, in conclusion, each one of these podcasts these guys do is somewhere around about an hour and a half. So it's a good podcast. It's a good listen. And as I say, I kind of listen to these guys while I'm working. But I'd recommend you go over to whoever provides your podcasts and look up the Keyboard Chronicles, because I think as a keyboard player, it's always good to hear about how other keyboard players work without having people. I mean, I'm not being funny, but I kind of find certain individuals are up their own bottom, and I don't like that. Whereas these podcasts are very genuine, relaxed. Nobody's trying to do any one-upmanship. It's a good listen. So go over Keyboard Chronicles, and on that note, it's time to sign off. So I leave you with my normal greeting, which is live long and prosper. Bye bye.